Hello everybody, it's good to be with you. Pastor Brent here, and it's Adult Bible Study. It's September the 8th, Wednesday, September the 8th. So we are in, the second week of September. The kids are back to school. Let's pray that they're back to school for a very, very long time in safe schools. You're back to your schedule, whatever your fall schedule looks like. And this is the week before in-person Bible study begins next Thursday, not this Thursday, not tomorrow, but next Thursday, September the 16th at 10 o'clock in the morning. So I think I'm ready for that. And by ready, I don't mean note-wise ready. It's just kind of ready for the adjustment from just speaking to a camera to actually having people in front of me. No offense, Hannah. Hannah does count as a person. But it'll be good to be with the rest of you, or at least some of you, next week in person. The cafe will be opened, and by that, we may not have all the fancy stuff yet, but on your way in, you could pick yourself up a coffee or a tea or a drink of cold water, something like that. The mums and tots are going to be here next Thursday morning as well, so we'll be sharing the building with them. So it'll be us old folks and the kids next door. Looking forward to that start. Let me pray, and we're going to get into the guts of what I wanted to talk about with Elijah. We're finally at the passage where we're going to talk about Elijah's mental wellness and how he's coping with the stress of his life. And we're going to compare all of that. We're going to juxtapose that, put that side by side with what we're going through right now. So let me pray for you. Father, we just thank you for this time together today. We just ask your blessing on everybody that's listening and their family and friends. We just pray, Lord, that you'll just help us to draw close to you, to really take your word into our heart. And if we find that we're struggling with certain things, and probably all of us are at some level with what's been going on lately, that we will find hope and faith and answers in the scriptures. So bless everybody, I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So you would have got your notes. In fact, I was a good boy, and I'm pretty sure I sent those to you yesterday afternoon. So you should have got your notes yesterday afternoon. Again, if you're not on the email list or you're not getting the notes, or you're saying, what? I'm not getting anything, email me, pastor@essexgospel.com, and we'll put you on that list. So your page 6, it says September the 8th, 2021 starts 1 Kings chapter 19. Really quick refresh. Last week, Elijah has had his confrontation on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal and the prophets of Asherah, and he has conquered them. God's consumed his sacrifice, and the prophets of Baal and Asherah were put to death. So it seems like it is a huge victory for Elijah, for Jehovah or Yahweh. It's a good day for them. However, immediately after that, King Ahab, heads back to the palace. He tells his wife, Queen Jezebel, what happened. And then Jezebel immediately utters a threat to Elijah's life. Let's pick it up there. 1 Kings 19. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. That must have been messy. That would have been over 800 people. I know I didn't talk about that last week, but I can't imagine kind of the bloodbath that was. Over 800 people would have been put to death. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah. This is nice. I don't know who the messenger was. Must have been a fun job. Sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow, 24-hour period, I do not make your life like that of one of them, meaning one of the prophets that was killed. So Elijah's reaction, verse 3, Elijah was afraid and he ran for his life. So I didn't use the whiteboard last week, so woohoo, we're going to use it today. He ran for his life. And remembering, if you're following this on your phone, always best to put this on portrait, on landscape and not portrait, because then you'll be able to read the writing just a little bit better. I don't know how it shows up on your iPad, but on landscape, this will show up much more clearly. So he ran for his life. Now, I want you to follow along page 6, 7, and 8. Now, page 7 is basically a map. And if you look at the map, you'll see that it just talks, it doesn't talk at all, actually. It shows via arrows how he left from Mount Carmel, went to Mount Horeb, and then eventually made his way back to Damascus. So from where he lived in Tishbe to Zarephath, Zarephath to Mount Carmel, Mount Carmel, you know, all the way down to Beersheba, his first stop, and then down to Mount Horeb. All of this we know on foot. So a very physical, taxing journey. So page 6 and 8 are the notes. Page 7 is basically just a map. You'll notice that there's not a lot of detail in the notes because I'm going to do my best, even though you can't really speak back to me right now. I'm going to do my best to be conversational with you in this lesson. So it's not going to be a conversation. That's physically impossible. We can't do that. But I'm going to be conversational. And I'm going to take what happened to Elijah and again, as I said, juxtapose that beside your life, all of our lives, put it side by side about what we've been going through. So he ran for his life. After Elijah's most significant victory, I mean, you have to understand this. This is a spiritual battle more than it is anything. And I think that's one thing that you and I have to recognize in our journey, that it's a spiritual battle first and foremost. Everything that we're going through, what we're going through right now with COVID, is a spiritual battle more than anything. What was going on with Elijah, although it's acted out physically, there's an altar, there's sacrifices put on the altar. God, burns it all up with fire from heaven. The prophets are killed. It seems like it's Elijah and God against Ahab and his gods of Baal and Asherah, right? And they're bumping heads. And it seems like it's physical. Like it's all being acted out in the physical. The drought is physical. The widow's son's death is physical. Her starvation is physical. But all of this is happening, folks, because Israel is living under spiritual bondage to false gods. And spiritual bondage to false gods means this, that Ahab and Jezebel have sold themselves out to the dark side, pardon me for getting all Star Wars on you here, have sold themselves out to the dark side, and they are following the prince of this air. They are following, the devil as, we would understand it today. Now, I've said this twice in the last couple of weeks. I said it last week on Sunday when I was talking about elections and voting and politicians. If you are not a Christ follower, you are following the prince of this air, the one that has authority over the unsaved minds of this world, the devil. You are either following Christ or you're following the devil. You're either, giving your mind, heart, soul, body to Christ and his word, or you're selling out to the devil. Now, that doesn't mean every unsaved person is demonized, but it does mean that their propensity to evil and the likelihood of evil and their likelihood of not doing the right thing is greater than that of a Christ follower. Now again, Christ followers aren't perfect. We don't always walk in obedience, and many times Christ followers sin. But we are born again by the Spirit of God. We have God's life in us. We have passed from death unto life. We are no longer walking in darkness. We are now walking in light. Now, our willingness to continue to walk in that light and the bright light is up to us. But anybody who is unsaved is under the control of the evil one. And so, yes, Ahab's evil. Yes, Jezebel's evil. Yes, they're following false gods. Yes, they're putting the prophets of God to death. Yes, they're doing all kinds of evil things that act out in the flesh. But behind it, it's spiritual. And Ahab and Jezebel are sold out to evil and to, the devil. Now, they wouldn't have called him the devil in those days, but let's call it the devil. Elijah is for righteousness and God. And so although it looks like it's two physical forces, it isn't. It's two spiritual forces going head to head. And what we see on Mount Carmel, when God burns up the sacrifice of Elijah, that, Jehovah is God. El is God. I mean, that's what we're understanding here. He's the one true one. And we think that's a tremendous victory for Elijah, and it is. But Jezebel says, this ain't over yet. This ain't over. This ain't over by a long shot. And she immediately threatens his life, his physical life. She threatens his physical life because she is under spiritual domination of darkness and evil. So again, it looks physical. It's a physical threat against the life of Elijah. But the battle here is spiritual. Don't ever forget this, folks. Don't ever forget Ephesians 6 and 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and wickedness in high places. And I quote that mostly, I think, from the King James, because that's how I learned it. So some of the newer translations might word it a little differently. But the battle isn't against flesh and blood. It's against spiritual forces in dark places. And so it's the spiritual forces of God versus the spiritual forces of Baal and Asherah. It's Baal and Asherah's prophets against the prophets of God. And it looks like the prophets of God are being killed off. It looks like it's a physical battle, and if you start counting it up, it looks like the prophets of God aren't doing so well. And then all of a sudden, almost 900 prophets of Baal and Asherah fall down. So it looks like, again, numerically, the battle is even again. But all of this is spiritual. And what we're going through today in the midst of this crisis is not just a physical thing. So let me erase some of this and let me draw some comparisons here. And let me just put on here spiritual versus physical. We're in the midst of a pandemic. SARS-2, COVID-19. 19 because all of this happened in the year 2019. It's a respiratory illness. It's contagious. It can be deadly. Can be deadly for those, older, compromised systems, already something wrong with them. But for the most part, people are asymptomatic or they have mild symptoms. Now that's fact, that's not fiction. We tend to focus in the news on, the ones that are filling up the hospital. But even in our church family, we had a number of people in our church family that got sick with COVID, and they felt lousy for a week, like they would have maybe with the flu or something like that. But they got over it. Now, again, that's what happens to most people. It is deadly for others. So we take it seriously that there's this illness out here, and it's making people sick, and it's killing people. But what it's done in our reaction to all of this is it shut the world down. And I know that millions of people have been affected, and I know that, several million have died across the world. There, tens of thousands have died in Canada. I'm not minimizing the numbers at all. And especially, I'm not minimizing the fact that these are people, known to people, friends with people, family with people, moms and dads and grandmas and grandpas and kids. So I'm not minimizing any of that at all. But it shut the world down, didn't it? It closed everybody and everything. And I don't want to rehash, again, my particular experience with this. But I started off in Florida, in a sense, being told by some people from this church, run for the border, Brent. They're going to close the border down. You're not going to be able to get back to back to Canada, which, people's intentions were good, but of course that wasn't true. You can't, in a sense, lock Canadian citizens out of their country. And when we got to the border, of course, they let us through. But then travel restrictions even got stronger after that, right? None of this for leisure stuff. Essential, fine, but no leisure going, coming in. You're not supposed to go out. Although we know people traveled during the pandemic. They did this, that, and the other thing. It shut your business down, or you had to work from home, or it shut your school down. It closed our churches. And maybe for some of us, even more importantly, we weren't even seeing family. There are people in this church that hardly saw a soul for a year, and the souls that they did see were one or two of the same people. I mean, it was just overwhelming that business, government, schools, churches, and your home. That's what it did. And all of that had an effect on us. And like Elijah, we felt like we were running for our lives. But let me change the adjective here, or the verb. Not running for our lives, hiding. Elijah ran for his life. Again, physically, how far can I get away? Now, I don't even know if he thought about where to go. But, he had spent a lot of time in the south, in the north, above Samaria, above Ahab and Jezebel's palace and kingdom. So he decided to go south. He went through Judah, through the southern kingdom, and even, deep into the south in order to run away physically. And that is that's a normal reaction for just about everybody when a crisis takes place. Now, this is a personal crisis for Elijah. It's not a community-wide crisis, but a great deal of fear, right? Last March and April, maybe even May, maybe even now, living with fear. Maybe not the same amount of fear as we lived with last year when we didn't know much about anything, although I don't know if we still know much about anything because everything keeps changing. But there's a great deal of fear. And my first exposure to that was when I was in Florida, and we were going to Walmart to buy some just regular stuff, and people were snatching up things like paper towels and toilet paper and all kinds of water, all kinds of staples, because there was a feeling in Florida, and probably here too, that people began to hoard because people weren't sure where this was going. So you better stock up because, maybe the world's going to hell. Maybe, the United States is going to hell. Maybe Canada's going to hell. Everything's become undone. Store up food and water. Maybe, buy some ammunition for your rifle or your handgun because, this is the beginning of the apocalypse. And there was panic. There was panic. It was palatable. And I could taste it when I went into those stores in Florida when all of this was like, second week of March now, 2020, where you trust me, I walked into the Walmart and I felt my pace pick up to go through the aisles in order to grab stuff because people were snatching it all up. And I found my own physical pace picking up with my cart, trying to get stuff before somebody else did. Now, I was just a tourist, but I was trying to get stuff. And you could sense the panic. Then I noticed in the place that we were staying, the area that we were playing, there was 20, 30, 40 Ontario license plates, and little by little, everybody started leaving. People were coming up to us, total strangers coming up to us, say, hey, we're heading back to Canada. We've got some food in our fridge. Would you like it? And we're like, well, no, we're going to be leaving at the end of the week. We don't need your extra food, but thanks. But people were leaving ahead of schedule, even though they still had lots of holiday time, because we need to get back to Canada before they close the borders. So lots of fear, lots of panic. Then we cross into Georgia, and Georgia was the last place we were able to sit in a restaurant in March 2020. And they had a throwaway menu, they had a limited menu, they had sparse seating, and they spread us all around. And after that, all you could do was get drive-through food. More fear, more panic. Got to the border guard gave us a sheet of paper about quarantining ourselves, and we go from, basically 3 weeks of wonderful holidays in Florida to coming back and isolating for 2 weeks as a family for fear that we've caught something and that we might give it to you and make you sick and perhaps even kill you. Now, you have to remember this, folks. Everybody is digesting this information in a very short period of time, and the information that we're given isn't wholly accurate because the people in power and the people who are supposed to know aren't exactly sure either. And then after our quarantining, we're having garage visits, and I've talked about this with my daughter and her husband and my grandson who live in the area. We're having garage visits, in a cold garage with a portable portable ceramic heater, warming up the garage, and we're not touching our grandson, we're not touching our kids because we don't want to spread anything. And then after that, we're given masks. And then, the church is closed by now, and we're working from home, and you're working from home, and the kids aren't in school, and it's fear and it's panic. It all seems very physical, like Elijah, but it has a spiritual impact. So without getting, too covert or conspiracy about this, we have to understand that, again, we've got government and medical officials that we trust are doing the best that they can to handle a situation as best they can. Imperfect people with imperfect science, imperfect understanding of science, trying to do the best they can. But what they did was they basically told us, their advice was this: stay away from other people. Right? If you knew your house was safe, that's fine. But stay away from other people. You have to go to a grocery store, so wear a mask, sanitize, keep your distance. Grocery stores all of a sudden had arrows going up and down. If somebody got too close to us with their grocery cart, we gave them the evil stare. That's too close. But that was the advice. Stay away from people. Stay away from people because you may be their worst enemy. You may make somebody sick. You may actually, make somebody die. We mitigate it with masks, with hand sanitizing, with distance. We're told to trust the science. Our church leadership took the position that we were going to trust the people in authority, understanding that they may not have got everything right. What is driving that is if they are right with their stuff and we might make one another sick or bring something in, transmit something, wear masks, physically distance, sanitize. And we've been doing that now for well over a year. We're told we're following the science. We know in the last year that, promises about vaccination and what vaccinations would do to us and how vaccinations would change our life, would be everything, right? And now we're told not enough people are being vaccinated. You could still get sick if you're vaccinated, those kinds of things. And so, although things are better than they were a year ago, things aren't where we thought they would be. Our kids still can't get vaccinated, and they're going to school, and numbers have been climbing a little bit recently, but the science has moved around. It's been a little fuzzy. And I say all that to say this: what hasn't been fuzzy is the effects of all of this on us. Believe what you want about whether it's good science or good public policy, whether you're all for that or, mostly for that or kind of in the middle of that or not for that at all. That's fine. But one thing I think we can agree on, whether or not we agree with the science and government policies and shutdowns and lockdowns and all of those kinds of things, is the effect on us has been pretty dramatic. You know, from the biggest thing is just basically our inability to socialize. And I'm going to put the word in, properly socialize. Because, you know, yeah, we did Zoom, FaceTime, and letters, and emails, and Messenger. Oh yeah, there's a phone calls, you know, maybe some distance visiting. And by that I mean like through the door or window. And almost always with masks. And again, we did the best we could following the government rules and regulations, and we were told following the science. But it created real issues with us in our ability to socialize properly. And what we've learned with Elijah's life is that when you take a person out of contact with other people, it affects them greatly. Elijah went from a place in Tishbe to a ravine, the Kerith ravine, where all he had was birds, to Zarephath, where he had a woman with a son that was dying, to, you know, a tremendous confrontation, to he flees south, and for a while he's got a servant with him, but then after that he's all on his own again, and he's on his own again until he meets up with Elijah. But there was tremendous isolation in his life. And when there is tremendous isolation in your life, when you're cut off from other people, it causes problems emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. When you don't have that interaction with one another, when you're isolated, it has an effect on you. It wears on you. You can be like Elijah and be the best, strongest person in the world. He's a prophet of God. I'm sure, you know, he was a good guy. James tells us he was a man just like us, a flesh and blood like us, but nonetheless a prophet of God. I'm sure a godly, spiritual man. But we follow his life from 1 Kings 18 into 1 Kings 19. And there's the constant return of isolation, 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 and the negative effects that has on him. Now, he's isolated in order to protect his life, right? He's hidden in the Kerith ravine, so Ahab doesn't kill him. He's hidden at Zarephath, so Ahab doesn't kill him. He's running to Mount Horeb, so Jezebel doesn't kill him. The isolation is to save his life. We've been told to isolate ourselves. Now again, there's less isolation now than there was, but there's still some. We've been told to isolate ourselves in order to save our lives or someone else's life. So you didn't visit your parents in the nursing home because, not just because you weren't allowed to, which was true, but because you might carry something in and kill them. You didn't visit with your neighbors or somebody else because you may be carrying a virus. You may be asymptomatic. You don't even know you have it, but you might bring it into somebody's home or life and you might kill them. So we isolate to save lives. Elijah isolated to save lives. But there is a cost to this. Now you might say, well, of course there is. If you don't isolate to save lives, many more people will die. That is likely the math. That is likely the math. There's no question about that. More people will die, more people will come sick. Without getting too political, you know, we're all making decisions. You know, we're told by our governments and our medical officers what to do, what not to do, but we're all making decisions about how obedient we are going to be to that stuff. Some of us have been very obedient to us. Some of us not so much. Some of us, mostly, and some not at all. Some not at all, based on your beliefs, your convictions, your conscience. But for those of us who have been isolating ourselves, this is the premise that we're operating under. If I'm careful with my physical contacts, I'm less likely to make somebody else sick. There are people that I really care about. I don't want to make them sick. And even people I don't know, I don't want to make sick. I don't want to do something that's going to make them sick. But there is a real cost to the inability to properly socialize. And this is where it has the spiritual impact on you and a physical impact on you. And so you weigh the costs, right? What the government is telling you is that physical isolation is the best thing you can do. Yes, there's a cost to it, but it's saving lives. You're weighing the cost and saying, well, how long and how often and how deep do I have to restrict myself in order to be a functioning human being? Obviously I want to save lives, but again, at what cost? Like, do I really have to stay away from grandma and grandpa? Is it really wise that I don't visit my parents? Is it really wise that I, don't see the people next door? Is it really wise that I don't have people inside my house? I mean, I'll tell you this right now. Our family in the last 20 months has had very few non-family members in our house. And I'm not sure if any of those people that we've actually had in our house have made it up our stairs into our living areas. I think they've just been inside at the front door. 20 months of that. That changed somewhat when we went to Spring Bay Camp. Although we didn't spend a lot of time inside the cottage, my mother-in-law's cottage, with strangers. And those that we did, we knew that they were double vaxxed. But for the most part, we ate outside, we fellowshipped outside, campfires, picnic tables, decks. But I mean, other than that, we really haven't had anybody that's not family, in our home in 20 months. Maybe you haven't either. I have been in other people's homes since that time. I have done weddings outdoors, funerals outdoors, church services indoors. Here I am talking to you. We're not having our first in-person until next week. Been a lot of isolation, for better, for worse, for our own physical health. Been a lot of isolation, and that has a cost to us. And I was on the phone today with somebody that was telling me that they still have contacts where it's 18, 19 months into the pandemic, and they have family members that they still haven't seen up close and in person in those 18 or 20 months, and they live just down the road, because they are so afraid to catch something or to transmit something that they're still living that way. So, even though we're told you can relax, use wisdom, there are still people that won't do that, and that there's a cost to that. There is a spiritual, physical cost to that. And only you can add that cost up, right? What's the cost been to you and your family? Some of you actually have got sick. There was a cost to that. Some of you stayed away from a lot of family and friends. There's a cost to that. The mental cost, the socialization cost, the emotional cost, the intimacy cost, the not being able to share thoughts, ideas, and dreams, the inability to go to work and converse with people, the inability of your kids or your grandkids to go to school and converse with people and socialize. There are real costs to that, and they keep telling us about that, and mental health experts keep telling us about that our kids are suffering, our grandkids are suffering, you're suffering at some level, I'm suffering at some level. There are people in this church that I haven't seen this close in a year and a half Talked to them on the phone? Yep. Shared emails with them? Yep. Even some old-fashioned mail letters? Yep. But I haven't seen in 18 months. I'm the pastor. They see me online, but I haven't seen them physically in 18 months. There's cost to that. Relationships, spiritual relationships, pastoral relationships. People have mourned the loss of loved ones, sometimes almost singularly. They haven't really had many people around them to mourn their loved ones that have gone on to be with the Lord. Your kids have apparently graduated from grade school or high school or someplace, haven't been able to really celebrate that well. Maybe a lawn sign. Birthdays celebrated in the driveways or in the back of pickup trucks. There's been a lot of suffering in many different ways. And we're not trying to compare one person's suffering to another. And some of you might say, well, hey, Brent, that suffering doesn't compare to maybe many more hundreds or thousands or millions dying. And I understand that. All I'm trying to share with you is there's a cost to how we're dealing with this. You see the anger out on the political trail these days, where Trudeau is getting, a lot of negative feedback, stones thrown at him, signs yelling, fingers raised, and other politicians to some degree as well, and also, the news media. There's a lot of anger and frustration out there. There's a lot of vitriol out there. What have we created with the way we've gone about things? And I haven't even really talked to you about church, right? There's some of you that may be watching that aren't happy that we let our church be closed, that we're wearing masks, that we're trying to keep social distancing. And again, I've told you the reason the board did this was we're trying to trust the government and the medical people that they're trying to do the best thing for the physical safety of others. But as a leadership, we understand there's a spiritual cost to that and a physical and emotional cost to that. And it's hard to measure, It always seems like people getting sick or dying is way up here and the rest of the stuff is way down here. And maybe it is. But we understand as leadership, there's a cost to that. People have left our church permanently because they don't like the way we're dealing with stuff. People have vexed one another on social media because you took this point of view and they took that point of view. There's cost to that. It has certainly hurt the unity of this church. It's hurt the church's witness. Some of you have sent me articles supporting this idea or that idea, and I haven't always been supportive of what you think, and you may not be supportive of what I think. That's created some division. Now, some of us are going to be able to work through that. As weeks, months, years go on, we'll be able to work through that and put that behind us. Some of us won't. It's always going to be there, even if they come back to church, even if they come back to fellowship. And what about fellowship, right? Have you been able to fellowship with people the way you want to and worship the way you want to and pray? We don't lay hands on anybody anymore right now. No, we will again, but we don't do that right now. We're not hugging. We're not praying together in circles. We're doing all of this. There's cost to all of that. There's a cost to all of that. And there's a link to all of this to spiritual. Don't think for one moment, and I'm going to end on this and pick it up next week. Don't think for one moment that this is just about some disease that somebody created in a lab, or some disease, and got loose, or some disease that happened because in some far off country, they're not good with their food, care, animal care, food care, those kinds of things. I mean, lots of different opinions on that. And then again, it's just a physical thing. Satan is going to use the pandemic in every possible way he can to hurt the people of God and to hurt people as a whole. And you and I have to be reminded again of Ephesians 6, that although it seems physical, that it's not just physical, and that we have to be careful of the wiles of the devil and be aware that the devil can work through medical people and through politicians and through organizations to do his will, because some people will follow that. Now, again, most people aren't bent on evil. Most people aren't bent on trying to take over the world. I believe that most people out there, even though they're not saved, are trying to do the best they can with the facts that they have. But don't think for 1 minute that there is not a huge spiritual component of what's going on here, because you've been impacted spiritually through church shutdowns and not being able to socialize and worship the way you normally would, not be able to see your family. You've been spiritually impacted, you've been emotionally impacted, you've been physically impacted, you've been mentally impacted. And don't think that that's just, it's a pandemic and that's just everybody's going through it. Don't think for 1 minute that there are not spiritual forces trying to work in this pandemic for your undoing, for the undermining of the church, for the undermining of the gospel of Jesus Christ, for creating division and hate in this world, and creating a world which becomes ungovernable, which goes into anarchy, and then creates a place where the gospel is not easily spread, where you can't live your quiet life, and earn a living, and you can't feel safe to go here or go there or converse with this people or that people. Now, again, I'm not into this big huge conspiracy that everybody's in this for undoing. But don't think for 1 minute that there's not something strongly spiritual going on here, because you felt it. There's a spiritual component to this. There's a significant component. Elijah fought Ahab and Jezebel, the prophets. It was all physical. They were put to death. Their blood was shed. But then Jezebel threatens him and he runs for his life. Don't think for a minute that that's just physical. We're going to see him trying to sort this out. He travels. He's under the broom tree. He just says, God, take my life. I'm no better than the rest. I thought I was the only one, but I'm no better than the rest. And he's depressed and he's discouraged and he's given up. And God needs to intervene in his life to help him to go on. But in Elijah's life, you see that he's physically tired. He's not eating. He's not drinking. He's not sleeping right. He's isolated. And those create spots where if you and I aren't careful, the devil can, get a place in our mind. Again, not that you're demon possessed or anything, but he can get a place in your mind and in your heart where you just become frustrated and you give up and you become angry and you're not thinking right, you're not acting right, because we're missing those very important components that make us who we are as people, as part of the family of God. And so, again, be prayerful, folks. After day 1 here, here's my advice to you on this topic. And again, we're going to get into it deep again next week. Be spiritual. You be prayerful. You be in the Word for yourself and your family and your Christian friends. You be praying for the government. You stand in the gap and push back against the evil forces that are going on. Again, there's a lot of stuff going on here that people are just trying to do the right thing, but behind some of this, there are spiritual components that are very detrimental to your life and to my life, and we need to be aware of that and to take care of ourselves physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, take care of ourselves with fellowship, to do what's right for us, even in the midst of the pandemic, in order to take care of ourselves and to take care of one another. So, I don't know if that was as conversational as I thought. I feel passionate about this stuff, but I am concerned that we're 20 months into this, and it might be another 20 months, who knows, that you and I are taking care of one another and we're aware of what's going on, especially in the spiritual realm. All this physical stuff is a reverberation to some degree of what's going on in the spiritual realm. Bye for now. God bless you. We'll see you next week.